Commander Zixhai stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the blue planet grow larger on the screen. The third planet from the star they called Sol looked peaceful from space, but he knew better. His people had studied this world for many months, and the reports were clear. The humans who lived there were primitive and violent. They fought each other constantly over small pieces of land and simple resources. Their weapons were crude, and their ships barely made it beyond their own. Moon! This would be an easy conquest. The Kthvar Empire had taken 17 star systems already, and each victory had been swift and clean. The pattern was always the same. Show up with superior technology and overwhelming force. Demand surrender. Wait for the inevitable capitulation. Sometimes it took days and sometimes weeks, but the result was always the same. No species had ever refused to surrender when faced with the might of the Kthvar fleet. Zixhai touched the control panel and brought up the intelligence files on human military capability. Their most advanced warships used chemical rockets for propulsion. They still fired metal projectiles from their weapons. Their energy shields were so weak that a single plasma cannon blast could punch through them. The computer calculated a victory probability of 96.7%. Those were excellent odds even by Kthvar standards. Sub-Commander Thelmos approached from the communications station and bowed his head slightly. Commander, the humans are responding to our first contact signal. They say they want to meet and talk about peaceful relations. Thelmos could not hide the amusement in his voice. Every species said the same thing when they first saw Kthvar ships. Zixhai nodded and walked to the center of the bridge. Through the large viewport, he could see other ships from his fleet moving into position around the human solar system. 300 warships carrying enough firepower to crack a planet. The humans had maybe 50 ships total, and most of those were barely armed cargo vessels. Tell them we accept their offer to talk. We will meet them at the coordinates they suggest. 2 hours later, Zixhai stood in the main conference room of the human space station they called Gateway. The humans had built it at one of their orbital construction points, and it was impressive for a primitive species. The metal was strong and the design was efficient. What struck him most was how the humans carried themselves. They did not cower or show fear. The man who seemed to be their leader stepped forward with confidence. I am Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Force. This is Dr. Lisa Carter, our chief scientist, and Admiral Ben Rodriguez, who commands our space forces. Morrison extended his hand in what Zixhai knew was a human greeting gesture. We welcome you to our system and hope this meeting will be the start of good relations between our peoples. Zixhai studied the three humans carefully. Morrison was tall and lean with dark hair and steady eyes. He wore a blue uniform with various insignia that probably indicated rank and service. Dr. Carter was shorter with blonde hair pulled back, and she carried herself like someone used to solving problems. Admiral Rodriguez was older with gray hair and the bearing of a career military officer. None of them showed the fear or desperation he had seen in other species. I am Commander Zixhai of the Kthvar Empire. We have come a long way to meet your people and learn about your civilization. The words were standard diplomatic protocol, but Zixhai meant them differently than the humans understood. Learning about a species made conquest much easier. Dr. Carter stepped forward and activated a small device that projected a three-dimensional map of the local star systems. We have prepared information about our history and culture. We would also like to learn about your people and perhaps establish trade agreements that benefit both civilizations. Zixhai was surprised by how much information the humans were willing to share. They showed him their major cities and industrial centers. They explained their government systems and economic structures. They even provided data about their scientific achievements and technological capabilities. Most species were much more cautious during first contact. This openness could only mean one thing. The humans were desperately hoping to avoid conflict by appeasing the Kthvar. Admiral Rodriguez spoke about human space exploration and their dreams of expanding beyond their home system. He talked about cooperation and mutual benefit with obvious sincerity. Captain Morrison discussed trade possibilities and cultural exchange programs. Dr. Carter shared scientific discoveries and offered to collaborate on research projects. For 3 days, the meetings continued, and HFY gathered more intelligence than he had hoped for. The humans were even more vulnerable than his initial reports had suggested. They were divided into separate nations that often competed with each other. Their military forces were scattered across multiple commands with no unified structure. Their industrial capacity was limited, and their resources were already stretched thin just maintaining their current operations. On the final day of talks, Admiral Rodriguez made an offer that confirmed everything HFY suspected about human weakness. Commander, we would like to invite a Kthvar delegation to visit Earth itself. You could see our world and meet our leaders. We believe that personal contact is the best way to build lasting friendship between our peoples. HFY accepted the invitation, knowing it would give him perfect intelligence for the coming invasion. As his ship departed the human station, he was already planning the attack. 3 months should be enough time to position his fleet and prepare. The final assault. The humans would never know what hit them. 3 months passed, and HFY believed he understood everything about human nature. The diplomatic mission to Earth had gone exactly as planned. The humans had shown him their major cities and military installations with embarrassing openness. They had introduced him to their leaders and scientists as if he were a trusted friend rather than a potential enemy. Their naivety was almost painful to watch. The Earth itself was a beautiful world with blue oceans and green continents. The humans had built impressive cities with tall buildings and complex transportation systems. Their technology was more advanced than he had first thought, but still centuries behind Kthvar capabilities. What struck him most was how the humans seemed to genuinely want peace and cooperation. They spoke constantly about the benefits of working together and sharing knowledge. Dr. Carter had been his primary guide during the Earth visit, and she had shown him research facilities and universities where humans studied everything from medicine to space travel. She introduced him to her brother Paul, who worked at a research station in the asteroid belt. Paul Carter was enthusiastic about the possibility of joint scientific projects with the Kthvar. He talked about discoveries they could make together and problems they could solve as allies. Captain Morrison had taken him to military bases and shown him human defensive capabilities. The weapons were primitive, but the soldiers seemed well-trained and dedicated. Admiral Rodriguez had been honest about human weaknesses and had asked for Kthvar advice on improving their defenses. The trust they showed was remarkable and foolish. Now, HFY stood on his command bridge watching the final preparations for invasion. His fleet had grown to 300 ships positioned throughout the human solar system. The humans suspected nothing. Their own ships continued normal patrol routes, and their communications showed no signs of alarm. In less than 6 hours, the attack would begin and human civilization would end. Submarshal Veltok commanded the advanced strike force assigned to eliminate human military assets in the asteroid belt. His orders were simple: destroy all human installations and ships in the outer system before they could send warning signals to Earth. Veltok was known for his efficiency and ruthlessness. He had never failed to complete an assignment. The first target was the research station, where Paul Carter worked with a team of 12 scientists. The facility was small and undefended. It existed only to study asteroid composition and test new mining techniques. Veltok's ships approached the station at high speed and opened fire without warning. The human installation exploded in a brief flash of light and metal fragments. All 12 scientists died instantly, including Dr. Carter's brother. Veltok reported the successful strike to HFY and prepared to move on to the next target. The destruction of the research station was recorded as a minor tactical victory worth exactly 0 strategic value. The humans aboard had been civilians with no military significance. Their deaths were simply collateral damage in the larger operation. On Earth, Dr. Carter was working in her laboratory when the emergency communication arrived. Admiral Rodriguez personally delivered the news about the destroyed research station and her brother's death. She listened to the report with growing horror and disbelief. The Kthvar had killed Paul and his team without provocation or warning. There had been no declaration of war or demand for surrender, just sudden death from space. Captain Morrison was in a planning meeting when the alert came through. The asteroid belt monitoring system had detected the explosions and tracked the attacking ships back to their origin points. The signatures matched Kthvar vessels that were supposed to be on peaceful missions in the outer system. Morrison immediately contacted Admiral Rodriguez and demanded an emergency meeting with Commander HFY. The confrontation took place aboard the same space station where they had first met 3 months earlier. Morrison's face was hard with controlled anger as he faced the Kthvar commander. Dr. Carter stood beside him with tears in her eyes, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Commander, you promised that your people came in peace. You said the Kthvar Empire wanted friendship and cooperation. Then why did your ships murder my brother and 11 other innocent scientists?" HFY felt no guilt or regret about the deaths. The humans were about to be conquered anyway, and a few early casualties meant nothing in the larger picture. He decided it was time to drop the pretense of diplomacy and reveal the truth. "Dr. Carter, your brother and his colleagues died because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Submarshal Veltok was clearing the area of human presence as part of our standard invasion protocols." Admiral Rodriguez stepped forward with barely controlled rage. "Invasion protocols. So this was never about peace or cooperation. You were planning to attack us from the beginning." The Admiral's hand moved toward his sidearm, but Morrison put a restraining touch on his arm. "That is correct, Admiral. The Kthvar Empire has claimed this star system and all planets within it. Your species will surrender unconditionally within 72 hours or face complete destruction." HFY activated a small communication device, and his fleet began decloaking throughout the solar system. 300 warships appeared on human detection screens simultaneously. Captain Morrison looked at the tactical display showing Kthvar ships surrounding Earth and its colonies. The human fleet consisted of 47 vessels total, and most of those were lightly armed patrol craft. The odds were impossible, but Morrison's expression never changed. "Commander, I have one response to your ultimatum." HFY waited for the inevitable surrender or plea for mercy. Every species reached this point eventually when faced with overwhelming Kthvar force. Some begged and some tried to negotiate, but they all gave up in the end. Human nature was no different from any other species he had conquered. Morrison looked directly into HFY's eyes and spoke 2 words that would haunt the Kthvar commander for the rest of his life. "Bring it." Admiral Rodriguez nodded grimly and activated his own communication system. Within minutes, every human military base and civilian leader received the same message. Earth was under attack, and surrender was not an option. Dr. Carter wiped the tears from her face and began coordinating evacuation procedures for non-essential personnel. The war that would change everything was about to begin. HFY expected the humans to surrender within hours of seeing his fleet. 300 Kthvar warships against 47 human vessels should have ended any thoughts of resistance. Instead, something happened that defied every military doctrine he had ever studied. The humans began to fight, and they fought in ways that made no sense at all. Captain Morrison led the first human attack just 6 hours after the ultimatum expired. His ship, Liberty Dawn, was old and poorly armed compared to Kthvar vessels, but Morrison used it like a weapon of precision. He approached a Kthvar destroyer at high speed and fired everything he had at its shield generators. When his weapons ran out, Morrison did something no rational commander would consider. He rammed his ship directly into the enemy vessel's command section. Both ships exploded in a massive fireball, but the Kthvar destroyer was completely destroyed, while some of Morrison's crew escaped in life pods. HFY watched the tactical display with growing confusion. Morrison had sacrificed his ship and his life to destroy a single enemy vessel. The mathematics made no sense. Humans were not supposed to trade their lives so easily. Colonel Steve Parker commanded a squadron of human fighter craft that should have been helpless against Kthvar ships. The fighters were small and fast, but their weapons could barely scratch. Kthvar armor. Parker led his pilots in attack runs that seemed suicidal. They flew directly at enemy ships and fired at point-blank range before breaking away at the last possible second. When his fighters ran out of ammunition, Parker ordered, something that shocked every Kthvar observer. His pilots began ramming their fighters into enemy ships. Major Amy Walsh was trapped on a human orbital station when Kthvar Marines boarded and demanded surrender. Walsh had 30 soldiers against 300 enemy troops, but she refused to give up. Her people fought from room to room using every corridor and maintenance shaft as a defensive position. When the Kthvar finally cornered the last human defenders, Walsh detonated the station's power core rather than allow capture. The explosion killed everyone aboard, including her own people. Dr. Carter coordinated the defense from Earth's surface, and her actions puzzled HFY more than any military tactic. While organizing civilian evacuations, she also managed teams of scientists who were working frantically to understand captured Kthvar technology. Carter pushed her people to work. Without sleep or rest, she demanded impossible results in impossible time frames, and somehow her teams delivered. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Brooks was aboard a human cruiser when it was disabled by Kthvar fire. The ship was dead in space with life support failing and no hope of rescue. Brooks could have surrendered and saved his crew, but instead he kept them working to repair the ship's weapons. When Kthvar boarding parties tried to take the vessel, Brooks ordered his people to fight with hand tools and emergency equipment. The battle lasted 14 hours before the ship exploded. What disturbed HFY most was how other humans reacted to these sacrifices. Instead of becoming demoralized by the deaths of their comrades, the survivors became more determined to fight. Every human loss seemed to make the remaining defenders stronger and more dangerous. Admiral Rodriguez broadcast the stories of fallen heroes to all human forces, and each tale of sacrifice inspired new acts of defiance. The invasion that was supposed to last 48 hours stretched into weeks as human resistance grew stronger instead of weaker. Civilian ships began joining the fight alongside military vessels. Cargo haulers were converted into missile platforms. Passenger liners became troop transports. Even small personal craft were armed with improvised weapons and sent against Kthvar. Ship's Captain Tony Garcia commanded a human heavy cruiser that was badly damaged and outgunned by 3 Kthvar vessels. His ship was losing power, and his crew was dying, but Garcia refused to retreat. When his main weapons failed, he used the ship's engines to ram the largest enemy vessel. The impact destroyed both ships, but Garcia's sacrifice allowed other human vessels to escape and regroup. HFY received reports from his commanders that defied belief. Humans were fighting with equipment that should not work and tactics that violated basic military logic. They converted industrial facilities into weapons factories. They reprogrammed civilian computers to break Kthvar communication codes. Teenagers like 16-year-old Chloe Anderson were hacking into military networks and stealing tactical data. The most disturbing reports came from ground combat zones where human soldiers displayed behavior that seemed almost insane. When surrounded, they fought until ammunition ran out, then used knives and clubs. When mortally wounded, they would crawl toward enemy positions with grenades in their hands. Surrender was apparently not part of human military vocabulary. Lieutenant Brooks had been reported dead when his ship exploded, but 3 weeks later, he emerged from the wreckage with valuable intelligence about Kthvar ship design. He had survived by crawling through twisted metal and rationing emergency air supplies. His determination to live and fight again was typical of human behavior that HFY could not understand. Dr. Carter's research teams achieved breakthroughs that should have taken years of study. They reverse-engineered Kthvar weapons and shields in a matter of days. They developed countermeasures for Kthvar sensors and communications. Most importantly, they learned how to adapt Kthvar technology to work with human equipment. Colonel Parker had died in his ramming attack, but his wingman, Captain Janet Cruz, continued his tactics with a new squadron of volunteers. She led pilots who knew they were flying to their deaths, but who competed for the honor of taking the most dangerous missions. Cruz herself survived 4 separate ramming attacks by ejecting at the last second and being rescued by other human ships. Admiral Rodriguez coordinated the overall defense with a skill that impressed even HFY. The human commander seemed to anticipate Kthvar moves and position his forces accordingly. Rodriguez used every human ship and station as part of an integrated defense network. He treated civilian vessels as military assets and military ships, as expendable resources in pursuit of victory. As the 4th week of fighting began, HFY realized that his supposedly easy conquest had become a nightmare. Kthvar casualties were mounting steadily, while human resistance showed no signs of weakening. The humans were learning from every engagement and adapting their tactics in real time. They were turning captured Kthvar equipment against its makers and developing new weapons based on stolen technology. Most terrifying of all, they were winning. The war entered its 2nd month, and HFY witnessed something that challenged everything he believed about civilization and conflict. The humans had moved beyond simple military resistance to something that could only be called total war. Every human in their solar system had become part of the war effort, whether they were soldiers or civilians. Admiral Rodriguez authorized what the humans called Project Lazarus, and HFY watched in horror as civilian infrastructure transformed into military assets. Luxury cruise ships became missile platforms bristling with improvised weapons. Cargo vessels turned into assault transports carrying human marines to board Kthvar ships. Even small pleasure craft were armed with whatever weapons could be mounted on their hulls. Dr. Carter led teams of scientists who worked around the clock to reverse engineer every piece of Kthvar technology they could capture. Her people had learned to read Kthvar technical manuals and were building hybrid weapons that combined human and alien systems. The speed of their progress was impossible, yet it was happening before HFY's eyes. Commodore Morrison had been promoted after his apparent death was proven false when rescue teams found him in an escape pod. Now he commanded a growing fleet of human vessels that used increasingly bold tactics against Kthvar forces. Morrison's ships would appear without warning and strike Kthvar supply convoys before vanishing into asteroid fields or behind planetary bodies. What shocked HFY most was the human ability to turn disasters into opportunities. When Captain Sandra Lewis lost her mining ship to Kthvar fire, she and her crew salvaged the wreckage and built it into a mobile weapons platform. Lewis used her knowledge of mining equipment to create new types of explosives and delivery systems. Her improvised warship destroyed 3 Kthvar vessels before being destroyed itself. Colonel Parker had indeed died in his ramming attack, but his replacement, Colonel Martinez, continued the same suicidal tactics with volunteer pilots who competed for the most dangerous missions. Human fighter squadrons began specializing in ramming attacks and developed techniques for maximizing damage while giving pilots slim chances of survival. The breaking point came when Kthvar intelligence reported that humans were planning an attack on the command ship Eternal Victory. HFY dismissed the report as impossible since his flagship was protected by 50 escort vessels and positioned far from human forces. No rational enemy would attempt such a hopeless assault. Colonel Parker's final mission had provided detailed intelligence about Kthvar ship construction and defensive systems. Before his death, he had transmitted technical data about the Eternal Victory's weak points and shield generators. Dr. Carter's teams used this information to develop specialized weapons designed specifically to penetrate the command ship's defenses. The attack began with a human transmission broadcast on all frequencies. Commodore Morrison's voice reached every ship in both fleets as he announced the assault. This is for Paul Carter and every other innocent person your people have murdered. This is to show you what humans do to bullies and killers. This is for Earth." What followed was the most coordinated human attack of the war. Every available human vessel converged on the Eternal Victory from multiple directions simultaneously. Military ships and civilian craft attacked together with no regard for their own survival. Captain Janet Cruz led fighter squadrons in ramming attacks against the escort vessels. Major General Patricia Stone coordinated boarding parties that fought their way onto Kthvar ships. The human assault fleet included everything from military cruisers to cargo haulers to private yachts. Dr. Carter had personally overseen the arming of civilian vessels with weapons designed to exploit Kthvar vulnerabilities. Every ship carried volunteers who knew they were probably going to die, but who fought with terrifying determination. Lieutenant Commander Brooks led a team of human Marines who successfully boarded the Eternal Victory and fought their way toward the bridge. Brooks had survived the destruction of his previous ship and had spent weeks studying Kthvar internal ship layouts. His people moved through the massive vessel like they knew every corridor and maintenance shaft. The battle for the Eternal Victory lasted 6 hours and cost both sides terrible casualties. Human ships rammed the command vessel's hull while others fired everything they had at its weakened shields. Kthvar defenders fought desperately, but they were overwhelmed by human numbers and determination. When the ship's main reactor began to fail, HFY ordered the evacuation of all personnel. Major Walsh had been presumed dead after her previous station sacrifice, but she appeared leading the rescue operations for survivors from both sides. Walsh organized medical teams that treated wounded Kthvar soldiers alongside injured humans. She refused to let personal hatred interfere with saving lives even after everything that had happened. As the Eternal Victory broke apart and burned, HFY found himself in an escape pod surrounded by human rescue ships. He expected to be killed or tortured by his captors, but instead human medics provided medical treatment for his injuries. Dr. Carter herself supervised his care and ensured he received the same treatment as human casualties. The destruction of the Kthvar command ship marked a turning point in the war. Human forces had proven they could strike at any target regardless of defenses or distance. More importantly, they had demonstrated that Kthvar ships and technology could be captured and used against their makers. The hunters were becoming the hunted. HFY spent his recovery time analyzing human behavior and trying to understand what he had witnessed. The humans did not fight like any species he had encountered before. They did not seek to minimize casualties or preserve resources. They fought with complete commitment to victory regardless of cost. Every human seemed willing to die if it meant bringing their people closer to winning the war. What disturbed him most was the human capacity for learning and adaptation. They studied every engagement and incorporated lessons into new tactics. They reverse-engineered captured technology and improved upon original designs. They turned civilian equipment into military weapons and civilian personnel into effective soldiers. Most terrifying of all, they were getting better at war with each passing day. As HFY was transferred to a human prison facility, he realized that his empire had made a fundamental error in judgment. The humans were not a primitive species waiting to be conquered. They were a dangerous enemy that had been preparing for interstellar war longer than anyone suspected. The Kthvar had not found easy prey. They had awakened something that would change the balance of power throughout the galaxy. Isolated in a human detention facility, HFY began to study captured human communications and historical records with the desperate intensity of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. The humans had provided him with access to their databases as part of what they called prisoner rights. They even assigned Dr. Carter to answer his questions about human culture and history. The first revelation came when HFY discovered that humans had been preparing for exactly this type of conflict for decades before first contact. Their scientists had theorized about hostile alien contact, and their military planners had developed strategies for fighting technologically superior enemies. The humans had not been caught off guard by the Kthvar invasion. They had been waiting. For it, Dr. Carter showed him recordings of human war colleges where officers studied something called asymmetric warfare. Human military doctrine was built around the assumption that they would always be outgunned and outnumbered by their enemies. Every human soldier was trained to fight against superior forces using tactics that maximized damage while minimizing resources. "We learned from our own history," Carter explained during one of their conversations. "Humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years, and we discovered that superior technology does not guarantee victory. Determination and adaptability matter more than advanced weapons. The side that refuses to give up usually wins in the end." HFY studied human historical conflicts and found patterns that explained their behavior during the current war. Humans had repeatedly defeated enemies with better equipment and larger armies. They specialized in turning apparent weaknesses into tactical advantages. They learned from every defeat and incorporated those lessons into future victories. Lieutenant. Commander Brooks had become a legend among human forces after surviving the destruction of 3 different ships. Each time Brooks had been reported dead, and each time he had emerged from wreckage with intelligence about Kthvar capabilities. His survival stories inspired other humans to keep fighting even in hopeless situations. The human ability to adapt and learn was more sophisticated than HFY had realized. Dr. Carter's research teams were not just copying Kthvar technology. They were improving it and creating hybrid systems that outperformed the original designs. Human engineers had taken Kthvar shield generators and made them 30% more efficient. They had modified Kthvar weapons to fire faster and hit harder. Commodore Morrison had evolved from a simple ship captain into a strategic commander who understood interstellar warfare better than most Kthvar admirals. Morrison's tactical innovations were being studied and copied by human forces throughout the solar system. His success against superior enemies had made him a symbol of human resistance. What made the humans truly dangerous was their refusal to accept limitations. When told that something was impossible, they found ways to make it work anyway. Captain. Sandra Lewis had taken civilian mining equipment and turned it into military weapons that were more effective than purpose-built systems. Her innovations were being mass-produced and distributed to other human forces. Major Walsh had survived her station sacrifice by using emergency life support systems that should not have been able to keep anyone alive. She had spent 2 weeks in a damaged compartment breathing recycled air and eating emergency rations. Her survival had convinced other humans that death was not inevitable, even in the worst circumstances. The human command structure had evolved during the war to become more efficient than the rigid Kthvar hierarchy. Admiral Rodriguez coordinated with Dr. Carter and Commodore Morrison in real time to respond to changing tactical situations. Human forces could adapt their strategies faster than Kthvar commanders could process the changes. HFY discovered that humans had been recording and analyzing every engagement of the war. They studied Kthvar tactics and developed countermeasures for standard procedures. They identified patterns in Kthvar ship movements and used that knowledge to predict future attacks. Most disturbing of all, they were learning how to think. Like Kthvar commanders, Colonel Martinez had replaced the dead Colonel Parker and had proven to be an even more effective leader. Martinez combined Parker's aggressive tactics with new innovations that made human fighter attacks more successful. His pilots were achieving kill ratios that should have been impossible, given the technological disparity between human and Kthvar craft. The humans had also developed something that no Kthvar military force possessed. Every human soldier, civilian, and commander was fighting for abstract concepts that they valued more than their own lives. They spoke constantly about freedom and dignity and justice as if these ideas were worth dying for. Dr. Carter explained that humans had learned to fight for principles rather than just survival. When you fight only to stay alive, you can be defeated by making the cost too high. When you fight for ideas that matter more than life itself, you become very difficult to stop. We are not just defending our planet. We are defending our right to exist as free beings. Captain Janet Cruz had become the most successful human pilot of the war despite flying inferior equipment against superior enemies. Cruz had developed new ramming techniques that allowed her to survive multiple attacks while destroying larger vessels. Her methods were being taught to other pilots who competed to match her success rate. The human population had transformed from peaceful civilians into a military force that supported the war effort with fanatical dedication. Factories worked around the clock to produce weapons and equipment. Scientists labored without rest to develop new technologies. Even children contributed by performing support tasks that freed adults for combat duties. HFY realized that the Kthvar Empire had encountered something unprecedented in their centuries of conquest. The humans were not just fighting to avoid defeat. They were fighting to win completely and permanently. They wanted to ensure that the Kthvar could never threaten Earth again, and they were willing to pay any price to achieve that goal. The most terrifying discovery came when HFY learned that human military planners were already preparing for the next phase of the war. They were not content to simply drive the Kthvar out of their solar system. They wanted to take the war to Kthvar space and ensure that no other species would face the same threat that Earth had survived. As HFY reviewed intelligence reports about human preparations for offensive operations, he understood that his people had awakened something far worse than a dangerous enemy. They had taught the humans how to fight interstellar wars and given them access to the technology needed to win them. The greatest military mistake in Kthvar history was about to become a disaster that would reshape the galaxy. The final battle for Earth began at dawn on the 90th day of the war, and HFY watched it unfold from his detention facility with the growing certainty that he was witnessing the end of Kthvar dominance in the galaxy. His remaining fleet numbered less than 100 ships, while the humans had somehow assembled a force of over 300 vessels, including captured Kthvar warships that had been modified with human improvements. Commodore Morrison led the human fleet from the bridge of a captured Kthvar battleship that Dr. Carter's teams had renamed Liberty's Vengeance. The massive vessel bristled with hybrid weapons that combined the best of both technologies. Morrison had learned to command Kthvar ships better than their original crews, and his tactical innovations had turned captured vessels into instruments of destruction that their builders never intended. Captain Sandra Lewis commanded a squadron of converted civilian ships that had been transformed into specialized assault vessels. Lewis had become an expert at improvised warfare, and her innovations were being copied throughout the human fleet. Her mining ships carried weapons that could crack asteroids and shields designed to survive in the most hostile environments imaginable. Major General Patricia Stone had been promoted from ground forces to fleet command after proving her ability to coordinate complex multi-unit operations. Stone commanded boarding parties that specialized in capturing intact Kthvar vessels and turning them against their former allies. Her people fought through enemy ships with the systematic efficiency of industrial workers dismantling machinery. The battle began with a coordinated human attack that struck the Kthvar fleet from 6 different directions simultaneously. Admiral Rodriguez had positioned his forces to exploit every weakness in Kthvar defensive formations. Human ships appeared from behind asteroids and planetary bodies to catch the enemy fleet in a devastating crossfire. Dr. Carter coordinated the technical aspects of the battle from Earth's surface, where she had access to the most advanced computers and communication systems. Carter had learned to speak Kthvar and could monitor enemy communications in real time. She provided tactical intelligence to human commanders and coordinated electronic warfare attacks that disrupted Kthvar systems. Colonel Martinez led fighter squadrons that had perfected the art of ramming attacks while maximizing pilot survival rates. Martinez had developed techniques that allowed fighters to disable enemy ships without destroying themselves in the process. His pilots were achieving impossible results against larger vessels and proving that determination could overcome technological disadvantages. Captain Janet Cruz had become the most feared human pilot in space after surviving 12 separate ramming attacks and destroying 15 Kthvar ships. Cruz flew a modified fighter that incorporated the best human and Kthvar technologies. Her success had inspired other pilots to attempt increasingly dangerous missions with the expectation that skill and determination would keep them alive. The human fleet fought with a coordination that seemed impossible, given their diverse mix of military and civilian vessels. Cargo ships provided ammunition and supplies to fighting vessels in the middle of combat. Medical ships moved wounded personnel to safety while continuing to serve as communication relays. Even small personal craft contributed by serving as scouts and message carriers. Lieutenant Commander Brooks had survived the war to become a specialist in Kthvar ship design and tactics. Brooks led boarding parties that moved through enemy vessels like they had built them personally. His teams captured ship after ship intact and turned them over to human crews who used them more effectively than their original builders. What shocked HFY most was the human treatment of captured Kthvar personnel. Major Walsh supervised prisoner operations that provided medical care and proper treatment for enemy soldiers. Walsh had somehow overcome her hatred of the people who had killed her comrades and was ensuring that captured Kthvar were treated according to human concepts of military honor. The tide of battle turned decisively when human forces succeeded in capturing the Kthvar command ship Infinite Glory intact. Dr. Carter's teams had developed specialized weapons that disabled rather than destroyed enemy vessels. The massive ship was boarded by human Marines who fought through its corridors with systematic efficiency and captured the entire command staff alive. Admiral Rodriguez personally led the final assault that broke the remaining Kthvar resistance. Rodriguez had learned to think like a Kthvar commander and could predict enemy tactics with uncanny accuracy. His strategies exploited Kthvar weaknesses that their own officers did not even recognize. As the last Kthvar ship surrendered or fled the battlefield, HFY understood that he had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans had not just defeated a superior enemy, they had absorbed Kthvar technology and tactics and used them to build a military force that surpassed the original. The students had become better than their teachers. The aftermath of the battle was even more disturbing than the fighting itself. Dr. Carter announced that human engineering teams were already studying captured Kthvar ships and preparing to mass-produce improved versions. Captain Lewis was coordinating the conversion of human industrial facilities to build hybrid warships that combined the best features of both civilizations. Commodore Morrison addressed the defeated Kthvar fleet with a message that chilled HFY to his core. You came here to conquer us, and instead you have taught us everything we need to know about interstellar warfare. You have given us your technology and shown us your weaknesses. You have turned us from a planetary species into a galactic power. We are grateful for the education. Admiral Rodriguez announced that human forces were preparing to carry the war beyond the solar system. Captured Kthvar ships would serve as the core of an expedition to Kthvar space, where humans would demonstrate their new capabilities. The prey had become hunters, and they were preparing to stalk their former predators through the galaxy. Dr. Carter compiled a complete record of human history and military development that she transmitted to the fleeing Kthvar ships. The files included documentation of every human war from ancient times to the present conflict. The message was clear. The Kthvar had awakened a species that had been perfecting the art of warfare for millennia. The final communication from Earth contained Admiral Rodriguez's warning to the Kthvar Empire and any other species that might threaten humanity. We have learned that the galaxy is not a safe place for peaceful civilizations. We have also learned that we are not a peaceful civilization. Tell your people and tell your allies that humanity is now aware of the universe beyond our world. Tell them that we will defend ourselves and our friends with every weapon we can build and every tactic we can imagine. Tell them that war is what humans do best. Zixai's final report to his surviving commanders contained a single recommendation. Do not engage human forces under any circumstances. Do not threaten human colonies or human allies. Do not give them any reason to notice your existence. The species we thought we were conquering has become the most dangerous military force in the galaxy. We created our own worst nightmare, and we will spend the rest of our lives running from what we made. As human ships disappeared into hyperspace, carrying captured Kthvar technology toward the stars, Zixai understood that the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted forever. The empire that had conquered 17 civilizations was about to become the 18th victim of a species that had just learned how to fight among the stars. The war was over, but the real conflict was just beginning.